How's it going, everyone? Welcome to our first podcast. This is All Blocks Covered, a podcast that talks about all the different facets of the NBA. I am your host, Marcus. I've got my boy Chili right next to me. Say what's up, Chili.
And what it is? And what's up?
As mentioned, this is a podcast where you can get all the latest news in the NBA. We're going to talk about trades. We got the trade deadline coming up in a couple weeks, free agency. We're going to talk about analysis on the court, talking about the reality show off the court, specifically NBA Twitter. We're going to find everything all about the NBA on this podcast. Now, before we actually really get into the show, let's kind of like introduce ourselves on who our favorite team is and who our favorite player is. So, Chili, you go first. Who's your favorite team and player?
So my favorite player is from all time is Kobe Bean Bryant. I think he's just all-time great player. Based on that, my favorite team are the Los Angeles Lakers, 17-time champions. And I know a lot of people try to discredit that 5 of them were in Minneapolis and whatnot, but still the same franchise, and I love them to the end.
Laker fans are pretty crazy on NBA Twitter. For some reason, it just seems like they can get any sort of free agent or whatever, but like sometimes I just cannot stand them. Now, for me, I'm a big San Antonio Spurs fan. Been a fan for them for probably like the last 20 or so years. My favorite player is Emmanuel Ginobili. Something about him, about the flair, the passing, the creativity. Probably one of the first people that brought like the Euro step in there. But they've just been dominant throughout these last 2 decades. And so that's my favorite team. So on this show, we got about 3 segments for you. First, we're going to recap the first half of the season. We're going to talk about our favorite teams that we've enjoyed. And then we're going to talk about some of the surprises, maybe some of the disappointing teams. Then we're going to give out some mid-season awards, MVP, Rookie of the Year, all that jazz, maybe no Jazz players. And then we're going to end it with maybe some questions that we had for the second half of the season. Maybe some predictions, storylines, whatever. And that'll be our podcast for today. Sounds good with you, Chili?
Heard. Let's get it.
Let's talk about the first half of this shortened pandemic season. And it really starts with an abbreviated offseason where you had the draft, free agency, training camp, and preseason all kind of jammed into 1 month, all leading into Christmas week. We've had cancellations and postponements because of COVID. But even through all those ups and downs and the learning curves for the rookies and moving different games, the quality of performance actually hasn't been too bad. I mean, we've seen some incredible individual performances. We've seen teams come out of nowhere. Defense is pretty much lacking for most teams. But overall, it hasn't been too bad. So let's start with this. Who has been some of your favorite teams? Maybe not your favorite team, which I have this odd feeling that you're going to actually say the Lakers. But who is some of your favorite teams that you've actually enjoyed watching in the first half of the season?
Well, surprise, surprise. My number 1 team is actually the Los Angeles Lakers. They got LeBron James. So much fun to watch night in and night out. Now he's got the long-range shot. So he's Logo James right now. So it's way more fun. AD's been out with injury. Super exciting player. Hopefully he can come back and dominate like he has in the past. But my favorite part about this team is the role players. You got Caruso, you got Kuzma, the fans, they love them. They perform night in and night out. And then our new 2 players that we have, Montrezl Harrell and Dennis Schroeder. Super fun, off the bench, lots of energy.
What did you think about when they first got Schroeder and Harrell? And I guess Marc Gasol, too. We can just kind of throw him in there.
I'll start with Marc Gasol. I wasn't too intrigued. I think he's more of a mentor. I don't think he should be playing that many minutes. Not like I'm talking bad about him. He's had a great career internationally and in the association as well. But with Trez and Schroeder, super hype. I mean, Trez, former 6th Man of the Year. Schroeder was a runner-up. What can you not like about them?
I think they just add more toughness to the team. Schroeder is just, well, actually, they're both incredibly on the defensive end, to be honest. And even Marc Gasol, too. I agree with you in terms of Marc Gasol. I think he plays a little bit too much minutes. I like to see Harrell a little bit more. And then obviously when AD comes back, they can just throw him at the 5. I really like that. And then Schroeder, I mean, he's just another playmaker for him. Kuzma is one of those guys that gets talked about on NBA Twitter a lot. He's kind of a somewhat inconsistent player. Another player that's still trying to find his role. Where are you at with Kuzma?
Kuz control, baby. I think, I was a huge fan when he came his first year, Summer League MVP, I think it was. A lot of hype. He's got the swag, but he's inconsistent.
It's weird because, like, in his first year, it was kind of like, oh, my God, Kuzma is literally the best player that we actually have. And then, obviously, when LeBron came and then AD came, he was really just trying to find his role. And I'm still not really sure what's their vision for him. I know he did sign an extension to be with them for a couple more years. But again, if he can just maximize who he is and just be like the 3rd, 4th, or 5th best guy and just own up to that, again, they're still a championship team. And I want to say that I'm actually kind of surprised, and I know we'll get to the surprise teams, but I'm actually kind of surprised by the Lakers is that they did have the shortest offseason. I think it was like 72 days, just like Miami. But I had them kind of being really lackadaisical, just kind of going through the motions. But they came out in full force. They were completely dominant, rolling over teams pretty much 2/3 of the first half of the season. And then AD kind of came out. But LeBron in MVP conversation in year 17, still doing it. And they're going to be title contenders.
They're going to repeat.
And you heard that from the man who absolutely loves this team. So let's talk about who's another team that you have, actually.
The other team that I have is a powerhouse in the Eastern Conference, and that's going to be the Brooklyn Nets. They have 3 guys that can take over a game whenever they want. Got my favorite guy, Kyrie Irving, best ball handler in the league. Got James Harden dropping dimes, and Kevin Durant scoring on anybody.
Did you have them in your preseason? Did you have them in the title, like just Kyrie and KD?
When Kyrie signed and then KD signed right after that, even though KD was out for a whole year, I had them and the Lakers in the finals for this year. A whole year passed.
So I also had them in the finals, but I was still kind of hesitant of KD coming off his injury, Kyrie also kind of coming off his injury, and then as well as the chemistry with a lot of the returning guys. But after the preseason, and I think the first 2 games was against like the Celtics and the Warriors, and they blew them out, I was like, wow, like this team is literally going to the finals. And then they had this weird stretch where they lost to like the Wizards and the Hawks, and then there was like the emergence of Sexland in that game where Colin Sexton went off, and you're just like, okay, so what's going on with the Nets? And then they decided, hey, 2 superstars is not enough. You need James Harden. I can't believe they even mastered to get that. I remember going on Twitter and putting out the biggest like Woj bomb memes and everything in that 14 trade where they somewhat sacrificed depth and a ton of future draft picks. I don't think they have a first round pick till like 2028, but again, they're in the thick of things. They've got 3 superstars, and they've got Joe Harris, who is a consistent 3-point shooter. Bruce Brown, who it's weird because he's a 6'4" guy that's playing center for them, and it just kind of works out. And that's pretty much to the credit of the coaching staff. But they're rolling, and it's really like the defense that's kind of like hindering them.
Yeah, and I was going to mention there's no surprise. If you watch the NBA, you know that the Brooklyn Nets do not play defense. But they score a lot of buckets, and it seems to be working out just fine. So stay tuned, see what happens with them.
True, but I also just want to say that KD being out, I don't know why, but like they're still playing well, and they're almost playing better. And I'm curious that when he does come back, like again, what is that chemistry going to look like? Because they haven't had a lot of games where it's all 3 of them. And then the biggest question is, with that defense, is that going to hinder them actually winning a title? But when all of them are healthy, it's hard for defenses to really even stop this team. And they even just added Blake Griffin, which I don't even know if that's going to make a real true difference, but we'll see what happens in the end. I know you have another team, and I know one of my favorite teams as well that we absolutely love. So we can just kind of jump right into it, is the Charlotte Hornets. And you knew that was coming up.
LaMelo Ball! I love me some LaMelo Ball, but I'll save him for later. I like Gordon Hayward with the Hornets. I think he finally has a chance to become the man on his team like he was supposed to with the Celtics, maybe. But he's been performing very well.
I think we both talked about this about like we couldn't believe that the Hornets actually gave him a 4-year 120 contract, and we're just like, I'm not really sure about this. But it works. I mean, he's in there and he feels like he's playing stress free. He's playing really comfortable out there. Could have been an all-star this past weekend. And then, like you said, LaMelo Ball is just bringing life for the Hornets. Like they're one of those teams where when you see them on League Pass, you're like excited to see what's about to happen. And this is one of those teams that have just completely skyrocketed to just like, wow, when they're in transition, they are so much fun. And that's the credit to LaMelo Ball as well as Hayward. Rozier has been pretty consistent. Graham has been kind of up and down, at least for me. But this is just like one of those high-flying teams where there's really no expectation for them. Like, they're just kind of having fun. And then when they play hard, there's obviously that result of them winning. And that's why they're kind of in the middle of the pack.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised in the future if you keep hearing Ball to Bridges because that is such a fun connection right there.
Exactly. So one of my favorite teams is actually a team that has kind of surprised me. And since you already picked your favorite team of the Lakers, I'm picking the San Antonio Spurs as one of my favorite teams and one of my surprises. I'm just going to flat out say this. For the last decade, every single year, it's been the Spurs are done. The Spurs are done. Even 13 and 14. After the 13 one, they're done. You know, like that was their year. They have maxed out Tim Duncan. They have maxed out Manu Ginobili. They have maxed out Tony Parker. Like this is it. And they still keep coming back. Now, you could obviously make an argument of last year not making the playoffs after going 22 straight postseasons. Let's say that again. 22 straight postseason bursts. And I was probably just like you guys going into the season. I probably had them going into the play-in game or probably not even like making the playoffs. But they're right there. And it's a credit to DeMar DeRozan, who's one of the most underrated players in the NBA, who doesn't get enough respect, as well as the young core. I mean, DeJounte Murray has improved, specifically in his mid-range game. Keldon Johnson is just so fun to watch. Lonnie Walker, high flyer. Jakob Poeltl, who is a really good rim protector. Devin Vassell, the new rookie, has been really nice. And then it's nice that Patty Mills, who's been there even in the championship seasons, that he's still producing off the bench. And Pop is just figuring it out with just different lineups. I will say I am happy that we had LaMarcus Aldridge during our time, but I'm also very fortunate that he's going to go somewhere. There's been talks about like trading away or buying him out, but I'm just kind of happy that we're both moving on and we're on to a new chapter of the Spurs.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up LaMarcus Aldridge because I wanted to ask you, and I know from talking to you in the past that you think they should have traded him a long time ago, but what would you want to expect from a LaMarcus Aldridge trade? What do you want in return?
In my dream, I actually want John Collins from Atlanta. I don't know how that's going to work out financially or through our trades, but I think most importantly is that we still invest in the young guys. I don't know what DeMar DeRozan is going to be after the end of this year, whether he goes somewhere else, because I know he's going to be either a free agent or he's got a player option. But if we can just stick to our young guys and not try to completely rebuild, because we're still in the thick of things without really that true superstar on our team. I don't think we're going to be able to attract any sort of superstar, but either continue to keep building through the draft or keep finding these like low-key, up-and-coming young guys that we can kind of fit in our team. It sucks that after the Kawhi drama, we've kind of like really kind of fell off, and the name of San Antonio has not been on the high end for most of these superstars, but we're going to have to build through the young guys. But like we're right there, and if Pop is still going to be here, then I still feel confident in our team.
But overall, I think the San Antonio Spurs organization is such a good influence. I mean, they bring players from all over Europe, and also they give opportunity to women to move up in that workforce.
Yeah, shout out to Becky Hammond. Love Becky Hammond. all throughout her WNBA career, and the fact that Pop gave her a chance. And to be honest, I'm just going to slay this on the podcast that I hope she does end up becoming the next San Antonio Spurs head coach. So moving on, who's a surprise team for you?
So it's no secret that the biggest surprise team of the season so far has been the Utah Jazz, the number 1 seed. They blew a 3-1 lead to the Denver Nuggets last playoff run, came back with vengeance. I mean, playing super good. The coach is great. The team is buying into his whatever he's preaching. You got Rudy Gobert, a defensive stopper. You got Donovan Mitchell, primetime shooter. You got Jordan Clarkson coming off the bench. And you got Joe Ingles knocking down shots. Like, it's super fun team to watch.
I'm actually kind of surprised, too, because just like you said, kind of blowing that 3-1 lead, even if they won that series, they probably, I don't think, would have done well in the next series anyways. But going into the season, I thought they would be a little bit improved, maybe more of like a middle-of-the-pack team or maybe more like a 4, 5, 6 seed. But they have kind of blown my expectations out of the water. They've just kind of reinvented themselves, and that's pretty much on the backs of Quinn Snyder, just really opening up the offense, opening up the team, really, for them to just play more freely. Mike Conley's in year 2 with this team. He's a little bit more comfortable. That kind of relieves Donovan Mitchell, so he's now playing hero ball, and he's coming off screens. And then you have Jordan Clarkson, who comes off the bench, and they run actions through him as well, and he's Sixth Man of the Year candidate. Rudy Gobert, he got his super max, but again, he is one of those guys. It's not necessarily the offense, it's just what he sort of does on the defensive end and just clogging up the paint. Their actions are incredible, and it kind of results from just high level of 3-point shooting, a lot of great spacing, a lot of great cutting. It's very Spurs-esque. A lot of people have been comparing it to the 2014 team, which I don't know if they're there right. I don't know if they're just right there, but this has been a really fun team to sort of watch, and it's going to be interesting. Can they sort of keep this up? They've been pretty healthy. They've got the chemistry, but again, they've never really been in this sort of situation with these sort of players. Can they beat the Lakers? Can they beat the Clippers? Can they beat the team that's right behind them in the Phoenix Suns? I'm not really sure, but they've got the formula right now.
I think when it comes to the regular season, I think they can keep this up. I mean, they've already beaten really good teams so far. When it comes to the playoff, I think the usual teams, the Lakers, maybe even the Clippers, now that they have a little more chemistry, might make a run. But to be honest, I don't think they'll have a chance. But they've been really fun to watch.
And one small thing, I guess, if we're going to be talking about weaknesses, is they don't have that one perimeter defender that they can sort of rely on that can guard the LeBrons, the Kawhis, the Paul Georges. They just don't have that one guy, but can they overcome that with their overall team defense? They've been one of the teams that's been top 10 in defensive rating. They've been top 10 in offensive rating as well. But can they sort of overcome that when it comes down to the playoffs? Because, again, they've just never been in that sort of situation with this team.
Better put some respect on Royce O'Neal's name.
I don't know if I can even trust Royce O'Neal. I actually really do like him as a player, but again, being in big moments and being that key defender on Supermax top 5 guys, I'm not really sure.
So what about you? Do you think they'll make a run, that the Utah Jazz are for real, or you think they're going to fold at some point?
If they can hold this thing together and continue to make threes at a high clip, I mean, the chemistry is there. If they stay healthy and just sharpen things up, I say why not? But I did mention the Phoenix Suns, and they're the second best team in the West right behind them. They've kind of done the same thing as the Utah Jazz in terms of being a very surprising team, and that's kind of on the backs of Chris Paul.
And even though they now have Chris Paul, they did go on an 8-0 run in the bubble, and that was really impressive. But having Chris Paul, you get the Chris Paul effect. You look at what he did in OKC and in Houston Rockets, especially with the younger guys. So the Phoenix Suns made a great move by acquiring him. I think in the future, Chris Paul is like a coach on the floor, so that's going to push everyone else.
Chris Paul is one of those guys that I've kind of grown to sort of like over the last couple of years, what he did with Houston and kind of elevating them in terms of being right there in the thick of things with the Golden State Warriors. And then when he got to OKC, a team that wasn't even supposed to make the playoffs, it was a full of young guys, and he got them again in the thick of things against his old team against Houston. And then he comes right back with the Phoenix Suns, the team that just hasn't made the playoffs in God knows how many years. And the Phoenix Suns is a pure example of when front offices say, hey, we just want to be young and athletic. Well, how long can you be young and athletic for and just not make the playoffs for X amount of years? And then when you pick up a guy like Chris Paul, a veteran, and you take that risk, look where you're at. You're the second seed in the West. I mean, again, it's the Chris Paul effect. It's them getting Jay Crowder, a stretch four from Miami that can shoot from the outside as well as guard any one of those top five guys, like I said, in LeBrons, the Kawhis, and PGs. And then it's just the bench. To be able to have Cam Payne, who's the guy that was doing the dances and the handshakes with Russell Westbrook, and on the end of the bench and not getting any sort of minutes and getting productive and quality minutes from him, it's pretty remarkable. And then you got Mikal Bridges, who's been a good 3-and-D guy, Dario Saric, who's kind of revived his career from Philly, and you even got Frank Kaminsky, who that was sort of a wash, but it just works for them. I think the one guy that needs to still kind of elevate his game, but he is DeAndre Ayton, who's kind of hidden under the radar, who was the number one pick and who hasn't really gotten that sort of criticism, but he's been sort of slightly elevating his game through the acts of Chris Paul and even Monte Williams.
Yeah, and I'm glad you bring Ayton and him being under the radar, because when he got to the league, there was so much controversy around him with NCAA and also getting hurt as well, getting suspended. So I think this might be a good thing for him, and hopefully he can keep developing.
Yeah, so the Phoenix Suns are just going to be one of those teams that, just like the Utah Jazz, can they sort of get over the hump? Are they going to be in the thick of things when it comes playoff time? And we'll kind of talk about that when we get to the second half and predictions. But we can't go to disappointing teams until we talk about this one surprise team, and it is the New York Knicks. The New York Knicks are back, baby.
So we got my guy, my former Laker boy, Julius Randle, finally living up to the expectations, a true all-star, and I'm so happy for him. I think he's the force of this team, and alongside with Tom Thibodeau, I think he's bringing the best out of his players.
Seriously, Julius Randle has kind of just completely elevated his game, and it's really off the confidence of Tom Thibodeau and like giving him extended minutes. I mean, he's playing some of the most minutes him and RJ are seeing, and that's typical Tibbs of just kind of just maxing out his players via minutes. But seriously, no jokes, no embarrassments for this team. They're in the thick of things. If you're a New York Knicks fan, you have no idea if this is going to be sustainable, but really sort of enjoy the moment. I did have some questions with them in terms of them bringing on Derrick Rose. I know he has that relationship with Tom Thibodeau, and they have a young rookie named Emmanuel Quickley who's been phenomenal for them and has really risen his game in the short amount of time. And I thought it would be taking away some minutes, and it has sort of, but that's something to kind of keep an eye on. But the New York Knicks, again, they're right there. I don't know if they're going to make the playoffs, but you've just got to enjoy this sort of story because they've kind of been the laughing stock of the last 20 years or 20 plus years.
And talking about the Knicks, it's kind of unfortunate that Spike Lee can't really enjoy being at the games. It's pretty sad, but oh well.
So I actually have a laundry list of disappointing teams, and I know you've got a couple. I'll let you go first because I'm actually curious to see or hear what disappointing teams you have on your list.
I'll start with the Washington Wizards. I mean, it's been a disappointment because Russell Westbrook, former MVP, walking triple-double. You got Bradley Beal, the leading scorer of the league. And they got to a really rough start. I mean, as of late, they're kind of climbing up, but they're my number one disappointing team.
I also had them on the list as well. I'll just say first off, it's unfortunate that Thomas Bryant got that ACL injury, but even without that, just I don't understand when you have two stars and you just can't overcome that sort of situation. I mean, they're one of the last teams in the East for a while. I will give them some praise as they were 8-3 going into the break, and they kind of sort of figured it out towards the end. But when Chile said, when you had like a triple-double guy in Russell Westbrook, and you've got Bradley Beal, who's just been all-world, I mean, even got a starting position for the East for the All-Star, it's like, how do you just not overcome that? One of the big things is really the defensive side of them. They just flat out just don't play any sort of defense.
And you know, in our show, we don't like to slander anyone, but I'm just going to ask you a question. Do you think David Bertans deserved that contract?
I don't know. Well, I would have to say, I always think about this is that if you can shoot, you're going to get a contract. And I'm looking at Duncan Robinson when I say that because he's going to get a fat contract because he's one of those guys that can't shoot the ball. And when I look at David Bertans, he, at the very beginning, you were just kind of wondering, did he deserve that contract? Why isn't he playing up to his full potential? He did start to get going a little bit, but he needs to be one of those guys that needs to be pretty consistent. I mean, he's not going to get super max money, but again, he's going to be that middle of the pack sort of contracts. And I think he did deserve it. It's just the fact that he's not playing up to that contract level.
So we'll see if Bertans gets going. One last thing I wanted to bring with the Washington Wizards is, who do you think won the trade with John Wall?
So at the beginning, when the Wizards were not playing up to their potential, one of the last teams in the East, I think a lot of people said John Wall was probably the winner of all this, which was unfortunate that he did end up getting traded because he's done so much for the Wizards in DC, especially off the court. But I guess we'll just go right into Houston and say that it's been kind of a mess there as well. They've just been up and down, even from the start of the season, with the Harden sort of mess in terms of him not showing up to training camp, him going to Vegas and partying. And it's just unfortunate with their first-year head coach and Steven Silas, who worked his way to become a first-year head coach. And he's super excited because he thought at that time he's going to get Harden and Westbrook at that time. And then Westbrook was just like, I don't want to be here anymore. And so he ends up getting traded. And so you're kind of excited because you have John Wall and even a Boogie Cousins as well with Harden. And then Harden's like, no, I can't win here, so I want to force myself out as well. So it's been really a mess from the beginning. And I think nobody even won the trade.
And I see what you mean that nobody won the trade. I actually thought that the Rockets had won the trade because they had John Wall, Victor Oladipo, Boogie Cousins, and Christian Wood. And even though Christian Wood's been hurt, I think he's on his way to become an all-star. And with all those guys that I mentioned, that's a recipe for success, I think. I think they should easily make the playoffs, but they've been struggling. Also, I want to mention how they got Kevin Porter Jr., and maybe that'll be a spark, but who knows?
Yeah, we're going to have to see what this team even looks like even moving forward. I know Christian Wood is coming back, but in the offseason, I would like for them to kind of figure out who their identity is through Christian Wood and what their vision is going to be. Because right now it's not necessarily clear. I know you talked about Victor Oladipo. I don't actually even see him being even on the team. I know he's been wanting to go to many different places, but I just don't see him long-term on the team. I want to move on and go to the Boston Celtics, and they've been sort of a disappointing team for me. Not necessarily even just the play, but just kind of like the makeup of the team. They did lose Gordon Hayward in the offseason, and I think most Boston fans, I think it was kind of mutual, where I think Gordon Hayward just wanted to be out, and Boston fans not necessarily were tired of him, but just wanted to see something sort of different. But it's interesting looking back now is that's sort of the missing link. They don't have that third playmaking guy outside of Tatum and Jaylen Brown. Jaylen Brown has elevated his career to being an all-star this year. Tatum is a fringe top 10 player. He's pretty much almost there. Kemba Walker has been out for about 11 games, but he's been struggling shooting, and they just don't have a bench. Marcus Smart has been out, he's kind of like the glue gun. He's like the Draymond Green for their team. He's their heart and hustle. And even when he comes back, there's just so many question marks. And I just feel like their window was last year. They had all the pieces, and they just couldn't get over the hump, and Miami was just more the tougher team. This year, I just do not like the makeup of their team. Sometimes they have Tristan Thompson and Daniel Tice in the game at the same time, or Robert Williams and Daniel Tice at the same time, and that's just not a recipe for success. And you can sort of blame Brad Stevens in terms of the play on the court, but I think it's the front office, and I think they really do need to make a move by this trade deadline. I did read that they haven't made an in-season trade since Isaiah Thomas. So we'll see if what Danny Ainge does. But they've got to make some moves. I've heard Harrison Barnes. I've heard pretty much the whole basket of sort of players. But they need that wing guy, that one playmaker guy. He doesn't need to be an all-star. They just need that one guy on both ends of the floor that can kind of get them to where they need to be. Because right now, I don't know what the postseason sort of looks like for them. Next, I've got one more team. It's the New Orleans Pelicans, and I don't know how they're in the position that they're in. They're not even in the play-in tournament. They are such an individually talented team. Zion has been incredible. Brandon Ingram coming off of an all-star last year and a most improved. They've got Bledsoe. They got Steven Adams. Lonzo is better. I don't kind of understand why they're in the position that they're in.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with you. With Brandon Ingram, shout out to Brandon Ingram, former Laker boy, and Zion. I mean, they're so much fun to watch individually, but it doesn't seem like they can get it together. I'm actually surprised with that they hired Stan Van Gundy. I would assume they would hire someone that can kind of relate to the younger players a bit more. And even seeing JJ Redick's reaction to having Van Gundy back as a head coach wasn't the best reaction, but we'll see what happens with them.
And you bring in Stan Van Gundy, who's a defensive-minded coach, and one of their struggles is actually on the defensive end. They're not actually a really good defensive team. They have really good individual defenders in terms of Lonzo Ball, Bledsoe coming in, Steven Adams, even Josh Hart off the bench. But just team defense, they just haven't been there, and they're one of the most inconsistent teams in the league. And I felt like Stan Van Gundy, being a veteran coach, would kind of bring this team together, rally them, be a tough-minded team, but it's been the complete opposite. And when we get to the second half in terms of predictions and questions, it's just like, can they figure it out in the second half? I mean, again, they're about 3 games outside of the 10th seed right now. To get into the play-in, and for the amount of talent that they have pretty much 2 all-stars, really. Like, they should not be in the position that they're in right now. Before we get into our next segment, we would like to introduce a short indent that you will normally hear after the first portion of each episode. This is what we're going to call our Community Assist Minute. During this brief time, we will highlight an NBA player, WNBA player, a team, or the NBA or WNBA as a whole that showcases something positive that they've done off the court that truly makes a difference in other people's lives. So with all that being said, let's introduce you to our first Community Assist Minute. This episode's Community Assist Minute is dedicated to Russell Westbrook of the Washington Wizards. He has teamed up with the LA Promise Fund to launch the Russell Westbrook Why Not Academy, consisting of a middle school and a high school in Los Angeles. The purpose of the schools is to create better access to educational and outdoor opportunities for children and the community at large in South LA. He mentioned in People magazine explaining how he realized through the work with the Why Not Foundation how often schools in underserved communities lack the resources and funding needed to support their students. He says, I not only want to inspire and empower these students, but I want to help provide the essential and necessary resources to set them up for success beyond the classroom. The Russell Westbrook Why Not Academy will deliver world-class education to South LA youth grades 6 through 12 to develop academic achievers, athletes, and active citizens committed to social change. We all know Russell Westbrook's accomplishments as being a former MVP and 9-time NBA All-Star, but off the court, his pledge to the LA Promise Fund and the South LA community demonstrates his deep commitment off the court to uplift the community and positively change lives. And this has been your Community Assist Minute. All right, so we're in the middle of the season right now, so it's time for some unwarranted mid-season awards. So we'll start with MVP, and I think we're both pretty clear on the fact that the front runner is Joel Embiid.
I agree. Joel Embiid has been nothing but dominant this season. Even at the beginning of the season, like if he didn't play, I would put all of my money that Philly would lose. So he's been a great leader too, mid-range. Obviously, he's huge, strong, dominant.
One thing that's also kind of helped him is what they did in the offseason, getting him shooters, getting him Danny Green and getting him Seth Curry. So anytime he gets the ball, obviously he's going to get a ton of attention. He has that opportunity to kick out to many different shooters as well. But it's amazing that he's come into the season in his best shape of his NBA career. And that's really what you wanted. I know even we talked about this actually last year, right when they got bounced in the bubble, that we just want to see that out of him. Want to see him like a full electric. What is his full true potential? And we're seeing that night in, night out. And he's been one of the more consistent guys in the league, just on both ends of the floor, being obviously a defensive stopper, but you're seeing his full bag of tricks on the offensive end. The outside shot, inside, being able to bully people, the mid-range shot. You've kind of sort of seen it all. Now, since he's the front runner, who's actually on this ballot? Because we can go like even 5 deep, to be honest, but who actually is on the ballot for you?
In my opinion, I believe Giannis is on the ballot. I mean, back-to-back MVP and also Defensive Player of the Year. But his numbers don't lie. You know, he's a great player, and he comes to play night in, night out. Another guy that I have would be Steph Curry and Damian Lillard on the outside looking in.
Let's go backwards. And I feel like Steph and Dame are in the same sort of conversation in terms of what they're doing for their team. Both of their teams are somewhat through the 5th through 8th seed. Dame's team in Portland has really been like the 5th seed, and the Warriors have been kind of somewhat up and downs, but still in the playoff picture. But they've been kind of doing it all for their team, and they've been putting up some real gaudy numbers to put them actually in the conversation. For me, I still have them on the outside looking in. I do agree with you in Giannis. Narrative is probably going to be a big part for voters in terms of voting for him again. He's putting up really the same numbers, and the Bucks are towards the top. They're not the number 1 seed like the last couple seasons, but I would be interested to see towards the end how voters actually vote for Giannis, knowing that he's putting up the same numbers and knowing that the Bucks are, like I said, a top seed. Another guy that I sort of have is Jokic, which it's kind of be really tough for him because Denver has not played really well. He's been their only source of true life, but he's been almost averaging a triple-double, and again, he's been doing it all for them. But I think for him, he's also an outside chance. One guy that I'm going to throw out there, and I'm curious what your reaction is when you hear this, is James Harden. What do you think about James Harden actually being an MVP candidate for his team?
You know, with James Harden, every year I think he can win it. You know, he's such a great player. But with the Nets, most people might say, oh, they have so many good players, there's no chance he can win. I think that out of that big 3 in Brooklyn, whoever plays the best has a chance to win MVP no matter what. So I actually agree with you. I could see that happening.
I think it's like a late sort of addition to the ballot right now. I think what he does just as an individual talent, be able to create his own offensively, whether it be a shot or for others. And you're seeing that on display even without Kevin Durant being able to find Kyrie. And I like that when he first got on the team, they kind of figured out like, hey, Harden is the point guard and Kyrie is the playmaker off the ball sort of deal. And we're going to see that obviously with Kevin Durant in the equation. But what he's done on the Brooklyn Nets has just been phenomenal for them, and he's just been completely running the show, putting up the points like he has been at Houston. Maybe the numbers are a little bit down in terms of scoring, but the assists are right there, and he has no problem being the facilitator. How about your boy LeBron James? Where are you at with him in the conversation?
Honestly, I don't think LeBron is in the MVP conversation or shouldn't be. You know, the past few years, I think he's been the best player in the world. But I don't think he's that anymore. I think with LeBron, it's mostly narrative, you know, year 17, 35 years old, still at the top of his game. But I don't think he should be in the MVP conversation.
I just want to make this clear that this is coming from a true Laker fan. So if there's any Laker fans that are listening to the podcast, all of that resorts to Chili, not myself. I actually have him in the conversation, but getting out of the conversation in the second half because of how he's going to manage the second half of the season. I have been completely impressed with the first half of the season, especially with AD being out and AD just kind of somewhat going through the motions at the very beginning or just being steady at the beginning of the season. But I think the fact that he's been playing every single game, which I was, again, shocked that he was doing, and then putting up the numbers, But I'm still interested to see how he does in the second half of the season in terms of how he's sort of managed it. I do agree with you in terms of narrative, though. And it's weird that he hasn't won an MVP since 2013, knowing that he's been one of the best players, if not the best player in the world, these last God knows how many years. So, again, we'll see what happens in the second half of the season. I also had Luka Doncic preseason as my MVP, and that's half narrative, half I thought he was going to rise even more, but he started out really slow, and he's starting to progress a little bit more. I don't know if he can actually get back on the ballot. He would just have to completely change the narrative and the play of his entire team. But all these guys right now, we'll see what the second half looks like. I still think, and we both think, that Joel Embiid right now is the front runner. Let's get to Defensive Player of the Year. So who do you have for Defensive Player of the Year?
I still have Miles Turner. I think, to be honest, I'm just tired of seeing Gobert win it. It would be cool to see Ben Simmons, but I'm a big fan of the blocks.
And I don't necessarily even have a true front runner. I think all three of those guys, Miles Turner, Rudy Gobert, and Ben Simmons, all should be on the ballot. I think I'll talk more about Ben Simmons and the fact that I think what he does in terms of being a versatile defender needs to be appreciated. The other two guys are rim protecting bigs, and I guess this is a hot take, but I feel like rim protecting bigs have an easier chance of winning this award rather than a perimeter defender, mostly because they can see everything that's in front of them and they can kind of clog the paint, where an individual defender or perimeter defender really needs that help. And someone like Ben Simmons, it's just like his length. He can guard 1 through 4 or 1 through 5. He can get thrown any sort of way. And what's helped him is that they have shooters on the team. They have Joel Embiid playing all world, so he doesn't necessarily have to focus on the shooting. I know that's a big thing surrounding Ben Simmons, but he can focus on being the best defender that he can be and for his team, and being a lockdown defender on whoever the best player is. And again, his length and his position versatility, he's kind of doing it all. And so for this award, and we're going to talk about like narratives with this award, it's a matter of, do you want the numbers, like Chili was saying, in terms of blocks or rebounding, or do you use the eye test in terms of deflections or disrupting shots in terms of what Ben Simmons is doing? That's going to depend on voters in terms of what they actually see the award is. So let's go to Sixth Man of the Year, and another award that we've kind of just both sort of agree, and I think most people do agree, and that's Jordan Clarkson.
Jordan Clarkson's had a phenomenal season so far, coming off the bench for the Utah Jazz. And this is nothing new. We knew that Clarkson was a certified bucket getter. He's a hustler, and he's young. He's got a lot of energy, and he brings a good spark to his team. So I would be surprised to not see him win this year.
I think he sort of wrapped it up. He's got the numbers, 18, 4, and 2. Incredible three-point shooter. When he comes into the game, they run actions through him, and he's looking to score anyway, so he's putting up more shots, so he's getting more opportunities to score. But he's been the most consistent guy off the bench. So for most improved, this one's kind of a tough one for me. I've got three guys that could win it. You can make a case for all three of them, but also you can make a case against all three of them based on the situations that we're in. How many guys do you have on yours?
At the moment, I only have one. I started with Christian Wood. I thought he got to a phenomenal start, and compared to last year, he made a big leap. He went from a role player to, I thought he was going to be an all-star, but obviously he's been hurt. His team's been struggling, so I don't have him in the race anymore. But my main guy right now is Jeremy Grant. How do you feel about him?
Jeremy Grant is a pure product of more opportunity than a rise of individual talent, at least for me. His numbers, he completely doubled, and that's somewhat by default, and that's why I have him also on my list. And I feel like most people have him as like the front runner, because if you just look at the numbers, again, he has doubled from 12 points a game to 23 points a game, 3 rebounds to 5 rebounds, 1 assist to 2.9 assists. And he goes from third or fourth or fifth option on Denver to betting on himself and going to Detroit and being the number one option. And he has risen to the occasion. He's on a not so good team and everything is running through him. So the numbers are going to be there. I just feel like it's more of the opportunity that's been given to him more than him just completely rising to the occasion in terms of his individual talent. I have Julius Randle, which this one, again, you can make the case for and you can make the case somewhat against. What are your thoughts on Julius Randle?
And, again, I love Julius Randle. I love anybody that's been through the purple and gold. But I don't have him on my most improved race because when he went to New Orleans, I thought he was doing work. And he's gotten slightly better. But I think that's the thing. He's been so steady throughout the years that it hasn't been like a huge leap. And that's why I don't have him.
That's my exact thoughts, to be honest, is that, again, we keep talking about narrative with these awards. Is it the numbers and the eye test from last year to this year, or is it their best overall in their career, and is their year this year better than their overall career, essentially? And I think Julius Randle, like you said, at New Orleans, he had similar numbers 2 years ago. And so the numbers this year are just slightly better. He did make his first All-Star this year, so I think that is kind of built into the narrative of just like, hey, is he the most improved this year? But the numbers tell you otherwise, essentially, that he had similar numbers in New Orleans. So, again, for all three of these guys, you can make a case, but I don't think there's a true front-runner, to be honest. I really think that's going to depend on the voter. So with Coach of the Year, to start the season, at least like the first month, I actually had Nate Bjorklund of the Indiana Pacers, a first-year head coach. Indiana came out with a completely hot start, and I was like, where is this coming from? This is the Indiana Pacers. But then they've kind of cooled off. We can't go without saying Quinn Snyder really just being sort of the front runner for Coach of the Year.
Yeah, I agree with you, especially with Quinn Snyder. I think the best team with the best record, whoever is coaching that team, should be in the race for sure. Actually, at the beginning of the season, I had Doc Rivers. I was a big fan of how he was handling Tobias Harris. And I think even Tobias came up to be almost an all-star. So had Doc Rivers, but for sure have Quinn Snyder now because he's got the best record.
Yeah, Quinn Snyder has just done so much for the Utah Jazz. Again, what we've mentioned before of just opening up the offense. It's predominantly the threes. It's the chemistry. It's the unselfishness. It's maximizing all the guys that he has on his team. Top 10 in offensive, defensive efficiency. He's just kind of done it all, whether they sort of sustain it or not. But the first half of the season, he's pretty much been getting the most out of his team. Another guy that should be on the Coach of the Year ballot is definitely Monte Williams, a team that is also in the top 10 in offensive and defensive efficiency. They're overperforming right now, where CP3 and Book are still sort of figuring it out. But again, he's maximizing the best out of his players, specifically the bench, and they're the second best team in the West above the Clippers and the Lakers. So that should definitely mean something for a team that wasn't even in the playoffs last year. I know most people, this is probably a definite he should be on the ballot, but what are your thoughts on actually Tibbs being on the ballot?
I think that anybody that has to do with the Knicks Association should get any sort of award just because of the season that they're having. So sure, throw him in, throw Julius Randle in the MVP conversation, quickly Rookie of the Year. No, I'm playing, but he definitely deserves credit for this year's.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, it's almost kind of a default for the fact that the Knicks are not an embarrassment and they're really in the thick of things. Again, as we keep saying, we'll see how this sort of sustains, but as if the ballot ended right now, I would put Tibbs on there. There's other guys. Billy Donovan's been pretty decent for Chicago in terms of elevating their game. You already mentioned Doc Rivers, James Borrego from the Hornets. I mean, they're having fun, really no expectations. He's a guy that's been really good. But I think right now you got to go with Quinn Snyder and then Monte Williams right behind. Now, when it comes to Rookie of the Year or just rookies in general, I made a rule for myself where I wasn't going to necessarily be critical of them, specifically even just like the first couple of months, just because of the offseason that they had. Even with like just the college kids, they didn't have an NCAA tournament, and now they had a later draft that was in November, a short preseason, a short training camp, and then they get thrown in there. And then even with some sort of COVID situations where guys have been out, rookies have kind of been thrown in there, not even really even knowing the system, just to kind of see where they're at. And I don't think it's actually fair to just say, hey, this guy just doesn't have it, when he didn't really have a great off season. Oh, didn't even have a summer league as well. So we have to take that into account. But for both of us at this point of the season for Rookie of the Year, I mean, it's the brilliant play of LaMelo Ball.
LaMelo Ball! I mean, he's been so much fun to watch. The passing, the swag, the range, the family, big shouts to LeVar Ball, big shouts to Lonzo and Jello, or Gello, whatever. But, a big stand of LaMelo Ball, and I hope he has a good career. For sure, clear-cut Rookie of the Year, and I can't wait to see what's next for him.
Shout out to LeVar Ball. Like, getting two guys into the league. And even just since we're talking about LaMelo Ball, so much hate going into the draft. So much hate after getting selected. Can this actually work out? Can what he did in Australia translate? And you know what? It does. And he's proving everyone sort of wrong. And he's really the clear-cut guy, and it's almost his to lose right now. It's just like the flair, it's the creativity, it's the funness, it's the transition, it's just bringing so much life to the Hornets, and he's really like a key percentage of why they're doing so good. There's other guys that we should probably sort of bring up that I don't think they're going to end up winning, but just kind of guys to keep your eye on. One of the guys that I really liked in the draft was Tyrese Halliburton. He's just so much fun. It's the length. It's getting De'Aaron Fox off the ball. Like, he can shoot from the outside. He can pass. He can take it off the dribble. He's kind of doing it all. And, again, he's another guy to watch. I feel bad for James Wiseman. And I made this joke to you like a long time ago in terms of that he looks like a baby giraffe out there, because it's just, you see the potential, but he just doesn't really know where to go, where to be. And you know that he's going to be really good, but right now he's getting a lot of hate, mostly because of what LaMelo Ball is doing. And again, he's in a system where it's a franchise that has been known for winning this past decade. And he was supposed to come in there and just produce right away, but it's just not fair as an 18, 19-year-old. And he only played like 3 games in college. And again, like I said, with the offseason that he had, like, I just don't think it's fair. It's a learning feel for him, but I'm going to evaluate him more in year 2 with a full offseason and what he can actually be. Anthony Edwards is just on a bad team. The shooting's not necessarily right there, but the dunking is. You see that on NBA Twitter. Emmanuel Quickley, we already talked about him in New York. He's been kind of fun. His Florida game's really smooth. Patrick Williams of Chicago, he's been getting a ton of minutes. Can we put Fernando Campazzo in Rookie of the Year? I know he's an older guy, but technically this is his first year. He's got some fun, flashy passes. He kind of reminds me of Ginobili as well, which I guess they know each other, or Ginobili roots for him on social media, because I would know that. But and then you have, Tyrese Maxey got a ton of minutes, especially when Seth Curry had to go out during that COVID situation, and he had like 20 plus points or whatever. But again, they only had 6 players, and so he kind of got forced in the situation. But again, the rookies, we'll evaluate them more towards the end of the season, but it's more of just like keep an eye on them, and a lot of them are producing right now. So let's get to the second half of the season, and what we decided to do is we each wrote down a ton of questions, somewhat like a mailbag-esque type questions, and we're just going to read them off and just give our thoughts on essentially what we kind of want to see answered, or we'll answer it ourselves, or what we think is actually going to happen. So I'll start out with the first question, and what do you think about LeBron in terms of the second half of the season? Do you see him kind of full throttle in terms of playing every single game at a high level, really kind of focusing on potentially even getting the regular season MVP? Or do you see him sort of kind of backing off, load managing, realizing that the playoffs are important, And it doesn't necessarily matter if the Lakers end up being the 1 seed or the 3 seed or 4 seed or whatever it might be.
I think LeBron's gonna be all gas, no brakes, and I believe he says something like that. I think he knows how important it is to. I know they're gonna make the playoffs, but I don't think. I think he would like to position himself and set his teammates up for success. So I don't see him sitting out. Who knows how long AD is gonna be out for? So I don't think he'll want to gamble with the team's future like that.
Yeah, I actually see him doing what he does every single year in terms of focusing on the most important thing, and that is getting to the title. And so I do feel like he's going to put out his best effort and do whatever it takes to essentially keep them still in that high seed. But once it comes down to the end, or at least the last couple weeks, and they're still right there in the thick of things, I think he's going to back off. And he understands that the title is more important than really the MVP. What's your question for me?
So, Marcus, I know you're a big Denver guy. I know you spent some time out there. So my question is, do you think that the Denver Nuggets can rediscover themselves?
They're going to have to rediscover themselves for them to get back in the thick of things of being one of the top seeds. And it really starts with Jamal Murray. Can he consistently play at a high level? He's been playing really well the last 10 or 12 games, but for the rest of the second half of the season and going into the postseason, can he bring it every single night? We're not necessarily looking for that all-world bubble Murray, but can he do more that can really help relieve Jokic so he doesn't have to do everything? And also the development of Michael Porter Jr. Like, he needs to be a little bit better on the defensive side, but he needs to even bring it more on the offensive side as well. And as a team, they need to be a little bit more consistent. They've been one of the worst defensive teams in the season, and they have had a hard time closing out games as well. So they, as a whole entire team, just need to rediscover who they are. And maybe they might, at the trade deadline, might need to get another piece, to kind of boost their morale and boost their play as well. So another question that I have for you is, will the Rockets win another game before our next podcast?
I sure hope so. But I think they will for sure. It's going to be tough missing Christian Wood. He's the heart and soul of the team. But they should get it done. I mean, they're an NBA team. If you're in the league, you're capable of getting dubs, so they should get it done. Moving on, Marcus, do you think that the Miami Heat can make a similar run like they made in the bubble last year?
They're kind of like my dark horse team. I was a little worried at the beginning because they were losing a lot. Spoelstra was kind of figuring out the lineups. Jimmy Butler was out. They had other injuries and COVID sort of situations, but they've won 9 of 10, and it's on the backs of Jimmy Butler. And he's one of those guys that not necessarily a top 10 guy, but brings a top 10 value, I should say, to his team. And when he's on the floor, they have a chance. And that's really against any sort of team. So I think they can be, and they're going to be one of those teams where they have the culture, they have the system in place. They won the bubble last year in terms of the physical and mental makeup. And that's how they were able to get by all the teams that they've beaten. Obviously, they didn't have the talent against the Lakers, but I think this year they can make a similar run because they have that culture and system in place, as well as Jimmy Butler bringing it every single night. So if they can stay healthy and he can stay healthy, I think they can just be right there. Now for you, can the Wizards somehow sneak into the playoffs?
First glance, I'll want to say no based on where they're at in the standings right now. But with the playing tournament, if they can get into the 10th seed, I think they will make the playoffs, no problem. They have those two superstars, and it seems like they're figured it out. But if they don't make the 10th seed, then obviously they're done. So
I think the one thing that actually helps them is the East is so jumbled up, and so like everyone's kind of beating each other up. I think it's like 4 through like 10 or 11. That's like only like a game or a half a game. So like every single night you could be a 4 seed or you can be like a 10 seed like 2 days later. So I think that's going to actually help the Wizards if they continue to play really well and kind of sneak in some of those games. But I actually don't think they will make the playoffs. So
And it seems like the top 10 teams in the West are pretty set. But out of those teams that are not in the top 10, do you see anybody sneaking in there?
I think the only liable case right now is the Pelicans, which we've already talked about them being like one of the most inconsistent teams because they have great individual talent, but they're sitting in like 11th or 12th with 3 games out. So a lot is going to have to happen in front of them. But if Zion is Zion, BI is BI, and they can kind of shore up the defense, hopefully they can just come together and kind of figure that out. I'm sure they have a chance. You know, they've already won games against really good teams, but also lost games against really bad teams. So again, if they can have that consistency and kind of push forward and also sort of rely on the teams that are in front of them to start losing some games or going on like a losing streak, they can be right in the thick of things. But again, if they can't figure it out, it's going to be an interesting offseason in terms of what sort of moves that they need to make. Obviously, it'll be centered around Zion and Brandon Ingram, but everyone else is going to be like, okay, so who's going to be left here, essentially, because that's going to be 2 years in a row of not making the playoffs when you have great individual talent. So we're going to have to see. For you, do you feel like it's Brooklyn Nets and that's it coming out of the East, or do you feel like some of the top seeds right now can actually challenge them and beat them in a playoff 7-game series to go to the finals?
As much as I want to say that it's just the Nets or bust, I think that Philly has a chance with Embiid having that strong presence in the down low in the post. I don't think anybody in the Nets can guard Embiid, and I know the Nets just brought Blake Griffin. We'll see what he does. But I think the Philly has a good chance to beat the Nets for sure.
I've got Philly as well. I think just like you said, the rise of Joel Embiid. But I also somewhat don't trust Danny Green and Seth Curry as the predominant backcourt to like get it done. But we'll kind of see. The entire team has been elevated through Joel Embiid. Even though I don't necessarily like the play of the Bucks, I would actually just like to see them rise to the occasion, whether they would beat the Nets or not. At least just play at that level because they've always been just right there, and it'd just be nice to see them actually like fight and go to a 7-game series, and then whoever wins wins. But I mean, they're also a team that they're on their last strike. I mean, they've been one of the top seeds, and they need to get over the hump as well. But the Nets have just too much talent, too much individual talent. I mean, 3 top 10 guys. I mean, when you have that sort of situation, you almost can just ride them in. We've seen history tell us that that's pretty much the case. All right, so let's close it out with predicting who our top 6 seeds are going to be at the end of the season for each conference. We know that the play-in tournament is 7 through 10, and so let's figure out who's going to be the top 6. Now, the first couple seeds will probably be pretty easy. Those are pretty kind of set in stone. It's going to be that 4, 5, and 6 that's going to be pretty tough, especially in the East where, again, it is a jumbled mess in terms of one night you could be 5th or one night you could be 11th or so. So for you, starting in the East, who do you have as your 6?
So the first, like you said, the first top 3 seeds are pretty obvious to me. You got Philly, Brooklyn, and Milwaukee. I'm pretty confident about those. 4, 5, and 6, I have the Heat, Boston, which is how it is on the standings right now. But for the 6th seed, I have the Pacers. I think they'll make a comeback. They're right now out of the playoffs, but I think they'll make a comeback and pass the Hawks, the Knicks, and my beloved Hornets to for sure get up to the 6th seed.
I'm actually really surprised that you ended with the Pacers because I actually feel the same way. Just like you said, Nets, Bucks, Sixers, I think in some sort of order, those 3 are going to be there. The Heat, they're going to, like I said, they're that dark horse team that's going to kind of rise to the occasion. Celtics are going to find a way. I think they're going to make a trade, a midseason trade, and just kind of figure it out. And then I do believe in the Pacers. They had a good hot start at the beginning. They've kind of cooled off, but it's more of just kind of looking at the rest of the other teams and knowing that most of them have just not been in this sort of situation before. And Indiana has been known to being a middle of the pack team, so might as well just put them right back in the middle of the pack. But again, it's been fun for the Hornets, Knicks, and the Hawks are going to be sort of possibly in the sort of conversation. The Raptors are going to be interesting because they are an experienced team. Can they sort of figure it out? We'll sort of see, but I can see all those teams kind of making in the play-in tournament. For the West, I'll start out with my 6, and I don't feel comfortable in this quite at all, to be honest, I'll start out with the same 4 seeds, Jazz, Suns, Clippers, Lakers. I do believe all 4 of those will continue their hot streak. And these 2, I just flat out I'm just kind of guessing because everyone could either be really good down the stretch or not. And I'm going the Nuggets. I just feel like they also kind of figure it out. They've also kind of been here. They've always been on the rise. They just need to figure out the defense and be a little bit more consistent. And I'm going to go, I don't feel confident in this, is the Blazers. So technically the top 6 seeds right now, but Dame's been pretty hot. Can they get CJ McCollum back? Can they get Nurkic back? I'm not really sure, but I think Dame can figure it out for them, and he has been this entire first half. Everyone else, I have a lot of questions about, even including my San Antonio Spurs. Can Luka kind of get over the hump with the Mavs? I'm not really sure, but who's your 6?
So for myself, I have the first 4 just as is: Utah, Phoenix, Lakers, and Clippers. For my 5th seed, I'm going to go ahead and insert Dallas because I think Luka is going to step up and KP and really establish themselves in the Western Conference. For the 6th seed, I'm in between Denver and, surprisingly, Golden State. I still think Steph Curry can make some splash, some noise, but, I'll just go ahead with the safe choice and pick Denver.
Yeah, the Warriors are like one of those teams where when you watch them, they can look like one of the best teams in the West, and then the next night they can look like a team that's barely trying to hang on to be in the play-in tournament. There's just so many inconsistencies with this team, night in and night out, and hopefully they can kind of figure it out by the end. And there's just so many more questions that we have for the second half of the season and many more storylines, and hopefully those get answered within the next couple months. As we finish up, one thing that we're going to do to close out every single pod is do what we call a parting shot. It's a last message that we want to send our listeners with. It could be sports related. It could be not sports related. It could be serious, inspirational, funny, entertaining, whatever it might be, whatever's on our mind, whatever's going on in the world, whatever last message that we want to get out to our listeners. And so what we decided to do is trade off. So I'm going to start this first episode and Chili's got the next episode, and we'll just go back and forth. So for this parting shot, today, I'm going to say this. So for everything you do, 20% of the people will automatically love you or it no matter what. And 20% will hate you or it for the exact same thing. The trouble is when you try so damn hard to convert the 20% of non-believers. That's when we fail in the biggest way and we lose ourselves. Focus on what you want to get out in the best possible way and keeping it true to the spirit and intent. And the 60% in the middle is bound to come. Trust the ideas, trust who you are, and what you can give in the world. And if it gets rejected, it's next play mentality. You wake up and get to create the next idea with the next challenge in the way. Because that's what makes life fun. Own your tomorrow.
I truly love this message. I think that sometimes we get so lost in worrying about what other people think about us that we lose track of ourselves. So, I'm with you. Just focus on yourself, take care of your mental, and spread love.
Exactly. And invest in your hobbies. So that does it for us. There is your podcast. Thanks so much for listening. We really appreciate it. Hope you guys really enjoyed this episode. Feel free to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. And with that, we will see you next time. This is All Blocks Covered, guys. Peace out.